All right, thanks so much. So again, my name is Shayna, City of Oakland. Barry Hooper, do you want to quickly introduce yourself, even though you're going to be speaking in a moment?
Hi, I'm Barry Hooper, a Senior Green Building Coordinator with the City County of San Francisco.
All right, thank you so much. And 5 more seconds to fill out the audience survey. Very exciting that we've got 50 participants so far, more were registered. So I know a few more will be trickling in, but let's go ahead and close the poll with at least a representative sample of who we've got. And let's see what folks have said. Wow, half of the folks in the room have a pretty good understanding of what is happening in this electrification world. That is very, very exciting. And I hope that as we go on through tonight, through the next few years, that that percentage and total number will be increasing dramatically. Oakland and San Francisco have very big, audacious goals about electrification. So we think there's going to be a pretty steep ramping up of knowledge and awareness. A lot of government folks, some advocates, engineers and architects. That's great. I'm really happy to see that we've got property owners in here, because it's definitely you who are pushing projects forward and deciding how far you're going to go and how ambitious you're going to be with your projects. We've got a few electrification contractors and electricians, HVAC contractors. Definitely hope that those numbers go up as more folks join the workshop. So thank you so much for participating in that. Let us dive into presentations. Hopefully you've all have seen the agenda. We're going to start with kind of some high level overview of how our 2 jurisdictions are looking at electrification, why we consider it to be so important. And then we're going to get really into the nitty-gritty of how do we pursue electric service upgrades and how to avoid them whenever possible. I can go to the next slide. So in Oakland, I'll start with our perspective on why electrification is so critical. For health and for safety and for justice. This is absolutely not just a climate issue, and not even first and foremost a climate issue. There's a big picture in the middle of your screen there of a gas explosion on Geary Street in San Francisco in 2019. Probably a lot of you remember the San Bruno explosion. There have been a lot of these over the years. We're in earthquake country. So having, flammable explosive stuff piped through our homes and through our streets is, it's adding an additional safety risk that is not necessary. And so much research has come out in just the last 5-10 years about how toxic gas is. When we talk about natural gas, that's kind of a term that the gas industry has used to make their product feel a little bit better, but really we're talking about methane gas. And we know now from extensive research that about 40% of children who grew up in homes with gas stoves, children who grew up in homes with gas stoves are 40% more likely to develop asthma. That is a pretty shocking statistic, and it kind of goes on from there. Beyond the health and safety, we're looking at justice in terms of energy security, energy reliability, affordability. I know that there are today issues with energy rates, and that is, that's work that is ongoing at the California Public Utilities Commission and elsewhere. But the fact of the matter is that you can have solar and battery backup for your electricity. If the gas system goes down after a major disaster, it can take many weeks for it to come back online. Whereas the electricity system is actually much quicker. there are a lot of upgrades that can be integrated with electrification upgrades to really kind of create a holistic picture of safer, more resilient homes. And we also know that this is going to be a net job creator statewide. We know that the switch over the next couple of decades from mixed fuel buildings to all electric buildings is going to create a substantial increase in employment across California. When we integrate energy efficiency with electrification, we do end up in that sweet spot where you have a safer, healthier home and lower bills. And like we're going to be talking about tonight, the overall costs of your upgrade can be substantially less, including through avoiding the need to upgrade the electric service. And I don't think we need any reminder that the electric grid has been pretty profoundly stressed through this heat wave, but we saw yesterday that from very simple behaviors, we were able to avoid power shutoffs throughout the state. And so that's something that we're going to be talking about today, is how can we do this without taxing the grid. So let's go to the next slide. There are a lot of challenges, and we're very aware, and we try to be very transparent about this. The good news is that in Oakland, we're looking at transitioning over 20 years. And so this is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is a process where we are working with, policymakers and industry and housing leaders and others to figure out how can we do this while avoiding housing displacement? How can we make sure that utility costs are not going to become untenable? How do we get over this barrier of education and awareness throughout the community? How do we deal with the old infrastructure that we have everywhere? And we're particularly focused on restaurants and affordable housing because those are the most vulnerable sectors in our community. So that's why we're starting tonight with this session focused on single family housing, because there are a lot of questions there, and there's starting to be a lot of professionals doing work in different ways. And so the more we can get on the same page and share our best practices, the stronger and easier this is going to be. So next slide. The grid that we are relying on right now for electricity is extremely clean, and it's getting a lot cleaner. I'm not going to dwell on this because Barry has some wonderful data that demonstrates this. There are lots of rebates and incentives and information sources online to help with this transition, including lots more money coming down from the federal government, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. Workforce development efforts are ongoing. As I mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities to integrate electrification with resilience, and the technologies are here. I think from the polls that we did, we saw that folks in the room probably are very well aware of the proliferation of technologies and the policy momentum around the state in this area. So we want to ride this wave and figure out how we can be as smart as possible in implementing this. I think there's just one slide left here, and just want to share Oakland's timeline. So in 2020, Oakland essentially passed a policy that bans gas in new construction. It defines new construction as being all electric. That was really the first step toward addressing all buildings. We've been focusing pretty heavily on making sure that the workforce is ready for this transition, and that's ongoing work. With the Oakland Workforce Development Board and others. Community engagement, community education is also a really, really big focus of ours. We are at the staff level creating a building electrification roadmap that will be going to council for their review and adoption next summer. And sometime probably in 2023, we will be pursuing policy to encourage electrification in the course of major renovations, or at least steps toward electrification in the course of major renovations. So please stay tuned for opportunities to weigh in on that. And all of this is marching forward to the goal of all buildings throughout the city being all electric by 2040. So as I mentioned, this is a 2-decade transition. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Barry.
Great, thank you, Shana. And I'm going to share a few slides with everybody here. So when we look to existing single-family electrification in San Francisco, we face very similar challenges to Oakland. So I'm going to just briefly go into. If we look at the last 30 years of climate action here in San Francisco, emissions are down 50% from the operation of buildings throughout the built environment. So, and we can see that efficiency has contributed to that because the gross energy consumption is either very similar or slightly decreased overall, despite a growth in the built environment and a growth in the local building stock. The other huge factor, though, has been the growth of renewable and low carbon sources on the grid, such as those that are provided by our colleagues here in San Francisco at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, which is a municipal utility that provides power exclusively from greenhouse gas emission-free sources, as well as similar to Oakland and its relationship with East Bay Clean Energy. San Francisco is served by the Clean Power SF Community Choice Aggregation Program. And so the growth of renewable electricity supplied directly to the grid has had a dramatic effect on the emissions associated with electricity consumption. The natural gas consumption has declined slightly over that same period, but its emissions have by and large remained constant. If we look more broadly, these aren't really unique. That issue of natural gas being a major contributor to emissions is not unique to either of the two cities talking today. So if we look at the entire Bay Area Air Quality Management District, the primary source of biggest single source of NOx emissions greater than passenger vehicles is residential natural gas consumption. And similarly, it is a substantial fraction of the region's greenhouse gas emissions as well. When we just look at the community as a whole, we see that the continued reliance on natural gas has direct health effects on health and safety of our residents. In terms of health, Shane has shared some basic statistics. In addition, it's estimated that there are 21 premature deaths per year in San Francisco alone from the emissions associated with our use of natural gas. We have directly experienced the effects of having a flammable and explosive material piped through most of our building stock with, unfortunately, the tragedy that's visible on this slide, which was the explosion and thankfully no injuries, but loss of several buildings on Geary Street on 2019. And regularly we experience other less dramatic circumstances that do involve leaks or ruptures of this material. When we look at resilience, we're focused on the reliability of the grid today and the the provision of power through these hottest parts of the year. But when we also look at the resilience of gas, it's estimated that the recovery time from the type of earthquakes that we are very likely to receive here would be approximately 1 week to recover electric service to 98% of the city and approximately 6 months to restore gas service throughout the city. So a huge differential there in terms of ability to recover from the types of disasters that we face here in the Bay Area. And each of those issues weigh most heavily on those who have the least resources and the least ability to adapt in a dangerous situation, or least ability to help themselves move to all electric equipment to avoid those acute short-term health and safety risks. And so that's the context for the city's climate action plan. Similar to what Shana described for Oakland, it is rooted in prioritizing equity for all San Franciscans, and for advancing a just transition. It lays out quite a number of very specific and concrete actions to develop the necessary workforce, to provide for public education, to support ongoing public engagement, and a number of key policies that will gradually, or perhaps not even gradually, but we are proposed lay out a plan for exactly how to make the transition to eliminate the use of gas in the local building stock by 2045. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about the climate action plan. I do refer you to it. Essentially, the most frequently asked question, most frequent answer to any question is it's in that plan. It really is a thorough and comprehensive document. Today, we're just going to talk about single family, and our goal is to highlight how electrification is a major opportunity, particularly for local contractors, that smart use of an existing electric service can support faster, simpler, potentially cheaper, substantially cheaper projects that can provide for the residents' expectations in terms of comfort and performance. And when electric service upgrades are necessary, we're aiming to demystify the process, the timing, and the cost for existing single family. I need to pause to mention that, particularly for contractors, a fantastic resource to be aware of is the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, and particularly its Home Plus, a residential program. The program is a provider of a number of rebates, and I'll highlight a couple scenarios using those rebates on my next slide. But it also directly collaborates with the community choice aggregation programs around the region. And so currently, as one example, for a heat pump water heater, the Bayron is offering $1,000 directly to the program participant, to the resident, in other words, or building owner, and also $1,000 directly to the contractor. It's up to the contractor where those funds go. They're not obligated to share that with the customer. That could be a way of being competitive, though. Without going into complete detail about incentives, I just want to highlight that the incentive picture has really directly affected the bottom line of electrification projects. And so if we take the some commonly cited typical costs, estimated costs for the most common electrification measures, and these are costs that were cited by San Francisco's own Bureau legislative analyst in looking at what the potential cost of electrification might be citywide. That totted up to a expected cost on the higher end of approximately $35,000 per single family home, or on the lower end, closer to $16,000. Of that, there's about $3,000 just for electrification measures, as well as another approximately $2,000 that I don't have in this slide that's available for efficiency measures that can enhance the comfort and reduce utility costs that are really a great idea to pursue. But just keeping it apples to apples, if you were to replace your gas appliances with efficient electric devices, that would qualify for approximately $3,000 in incentives from Bayren. There's the $1,000 direct-to-contractor incentive for the heat pump water heater. And then the newly minted Federal Inflation Reduction Act is bringing forward a lot of different and potential and quite complicated incentives. But the most straightforward one, and the one that's going to be available right away for projects that are installed January 1st or later, adds up to about $3,200 maximum per housing unit per year for installation of heat pumps. Can support electric panel upgrades, can support induction ranges. So leaving the details aside, essentially that adds up to a huge difference in the both that gross cost, and then the bottom line here speaks to a real apples to apples comparison, which is gas devices will eventually wear out and will need replacement. And so the critical question is, how does the net cost of going all electric compare to a gas-to-gas replacement project that you may have already needed to do anyway? And the answer is, it really depends on the decisions you make in terms of design and total power consumption of that equipment. And I can't think of a better moment to pass the baton here to our next speaker, Tom Kabat, who's going to be talking about lot of the detail of really how to manage those questions and to seek the right-hand side of the ledger and what the benefits are. So with that, Tom, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hope you're ready to join us.
All right, I am. Thanks so much, Barry. And let's see if I can put my own slides up there. All right, let's see what, can you see some of my screen there?
Apologize, Tom. Yeah, it looks great. And just to clarify, I shared my slides because I made it edit at the very end. And for the other presenters, you're totally welcome to just let Diana manage the slides. But Tom, please take it away.
All right. Actually, Barry, I've lost track. Am I steering my slides? Because I can, and I enjoy it. So I'm on a slide that's our only remaining path to 2 degrees C. Is that what the audience also sees?
That's definitely what I see.
All
So
right.
You're good to go. Sorry for the
All right,
interruption.
thanks. So thanks so much for inviting me to talk with the gang here. I put these slides together in partnership with my volunteer partner, Josie Gaylord. She came up through the solar industry. I came up through the utility industry, but we both electrified our own homes and did a lot of work with Menlo Park Environmental Quality Commission and kind of really started looking at the nexus between the grid, the electrification and policy. And so this slide's just showing that we really have to get on it. As Shana was saying, we have to start transitioning immediately and if we're going to make the 20-year transition to a safe climate. So we need to be putting in the efficient electric devices as the time rolls around. And so this example shows on the top row the replacing cars. People tend to replace their car about every 7 years on average, whereas they tend to replace their furnace about every 30 years. And so if somebody installs a new furnace, it'll be here emitting. That's what all these gray furnace shadows are for the next 30 years if you install one, whereas a car, it's only about 7 years of gray shadows out of that thing. So today, as you mentioned, Barry, we're talking about the roughly 8 million existing homes, single-family detached homes, and how to electrify them. And about 64% are already using gas heat, and that's what we need to be looking at. How do people get off of that? The challenge is that it's really going to accelerate the number of conversions each year. And so we need to be figuring out how do we make those simpler and faster. The good news is that a lot of homes have a 100-amp electric panel, which people think of now as a small panel, or bigger. Lots of folks have a 200-amp panel, but a 100-amp panel, Josie and I have found in our studies with, say, the 10 homes on the left in San Mateo County, that 100-amp panels, they deliver 24 kilowatts of power. You know, just 100 amps times 240 volts is 24 kilowatts of power. That's a lot of power. And so when we looked at what's the usage like on those panels, it's shown in the blue area down below. So there's the 10 home sample plus Josie's and my homes over on the right. And what we notice in the highest usage hour or highest usage 15 minutes of the year, the very peak, when you've got a big party going and you're running on all 4 burners and you're doing the laundry during the party for some reason and everything else is going, people are loading up typically around 30% or less of their panel. So there's a lot of capability there. Even these homes that were nearly all electric, mine's all electric, but my electric vehicles are bicycles. And so I'll probably be stuck down here, always not using my whole panel. But the good news is there's plenty of space on the panel. So what we talk about in whole home electrification when we're trying to do it really efficiently and avoiding upsizing the panel, and people use the term upgrade. I use that term for when you're going to modernize your panel at the same size. But what I see a lot of people doing is they use that word, but they're really upsizing too. So what we found is it's always useful to make an electrification plan and to look at the National Electric Code load calculations. And so we put together websites and guides that are in like the Redwood Energy Retrofit Guide about how to how to do those calculations. There's also a great PG&E class on that, about a 3-hour class if you want to go really in depth into it. But the thing we always need to do in those plans is take a look at power efficient equipment choices. And so that might be choosing the better performing heat pumps that have higher COPs or HSPFs, heating season performance factor, or higher SEERs, seasonal energy efficiency ratio. Those equipment that have the better delivery of service for the amount of power they use. And I'm deliberately using the word power to mean watts of electricity or thermal power even, but these things, even energy efficient equipment is a big power saver. And then sometimes we also end up needing to use some kind of circuit controls. Often we'll look at a circuit control like a pauser on the EV charger, because the way the NEC load calculations score car chargers, they score them at 125% of the load that the car charger is drawing. So it really gets penalized in the NEC panel size calculation, and that drives upsizing, which makes people think they need a bigger panel, but those blue bars were showing us, no, you didn't. So there's the look at a page out of the Redwood Energy Guide. I use the term watt diet, but people say, hey, Tom, nobody wants to diet. You should say panel optimization, but I don't have enough time. So I'll call it what I want. So do the trades know how to do this kind of panel optimization or watt dieting when they come to your home? And usually not if you're going one item at a time. Each trade kind of thinks about installing their own appliance and not working on your whole home. And so if they see there's space for a 30 amp water heater, and that's all the space you have, they will let you know everything's fine. We used the space you had and we got your water heater in there. But now you're kind of painted into a corner. So what we're noticing is the trades need to be re-educated about how to do this if everyone's going to stay in their lane on the panel, and maybe the customer needs a kind of an electrification plan that identifies how big each lane is, how many amps are available for the heat pump, how many for the heat pump water heater, how many for the cooktop, how many for the car charger, that kind of thing. So this little Venn diagram is showing, this concept of watt dieting or panel optimization. It's just about really picking what are those efficient appliances or the power sipping ones. And so we might end up recommending a bigger heat pump water heater tank with a smaller backup resistance element, because what we really want is not faster recovery water heaters. I don't care. I'm not going to bird dog my water heater with my stopwatch. I care that I got all the hot water I needed and I can get that out of a big tank. And then I don't care if it takes all the sunny hours of the day to recharge itself on the abundant solar power on our grid. So panel optimization and that kind of thing is kind of an overarching issue. And then it's producing societal benefits, like it keeps us from overstressing the grid. And these more efficient devices just put a smaller load on the grid. And then better sized devices avoid overheating the transformers on pole tops. And I can explain that through the I²R law if you need Ohm's law to do that, but we may not have time. The personal benefits you'll realize are avoiding the whole panel upsizing cost and adventure. And PG&E is going to tell you, more about the adventure and how to go through it if you choose to go that route. I'm trying to help lure people into do the plan that helps you stay on your existing panel and avoid those other costs. So here's what I was talking about is the current practice that sometimes happens is there's the customer painted into the corner because the first trade to race for the panel, they got there, say it was the plumber or the heat pump guy, either one put in a big sloppy piece of equipment, used up all the space, the customer's jammed in the corner, can't really finish electrifying. But what I'm advising is that people make an electrification plan, and that'll help guide them through, how much do they need for each end use, and that they conserve on those end uses by looking at watt dieting. And that may include things like adding insulation to the walls and the attic. And you don't have to add insulation first. You can do the heat pump before the insulation and do the experiment of go a year or two with the heat pump and see if you're ready to do the insulation. And you might be, but we need to get out of a sequencing trap. you don't want to delay decisions until you do other things. You want to take every opportunity to get the right devices in when you have the chance. So the best practice will be combining electrification plans and watt dieting, leading to the happy customer. I already mentioned there's 24 kilowatts of power on these 100 amp panels. These things will deliver a lot of energy, and we can save a lot of money and produce these societal benefits like avoiding program hiccups. If people are sloppy in electrifying and we saturate the transformer capacity in the neighborhoods, the utility has to slow everyone down while they go and upgrade the transformers. In a nearby town, they called me in to look at a situation where their assistant director of utilities said they had to stop the whole electrification program for 4 years while he staffed up to go after the pole top transformers. But mayor and community members kind of started convening meetings to look at the situation. They found that they really ought to keep going with electrification, just pivot towards the more efficient methods and smaller car chargers, et cetera. So this is my favorite graph about comparing these 5 end uses. So you can see clothes drying, cooking, hot water, heating, and driving. And then we've got the panel amps or panel watts. So 12 kilowatts out here at the bottom right is kind of demanded by a big old 50 amp circuit for car charging. And the electricians often tell new car EV buyers, the person's got like some kind of range anxiety, so they kind of funnel them into these 50 amp circuits, and that just takes up half the panel space and gives them 98,000 miles a year of charging, but the person's only driving 10,000 miles a year. So they would have been fine up here on the 120 volt plug that can deliver 13,000 miles a year if you are charging at 8 hours a night. So, we need to take a look at where we are on this. And then here on heat pumps, often people are putting in low cost, cheap HSPF 8.5 federal standard heat pumps, and that uses more power. And sometimes contractors are not quite certain, they're remembering the 1950s when you needed a backup resistor strip in our climate, and no, you don't. Heat pumps can perform down to -17 or -30 Fahrenheit. They perform superbly in our climate. You don't need backup resistor strips. So you ought to focus on getting a more efficient heat pump without the resistor strip and make it an inverter driven heat pump. It's a lot more comfortable and it sips power. 3-ton units we can see go on a 20 amp circuit and only draw 17 amps. For the hot water, I'm always recommending these 15 amp 240 volt water heaters here in the middle, but now they're coming out with these great 120 volt heat pump water heaters that will be even more efficient. We just recommend people pick a bigger tank size so they've got plenty of hot water and then give it time to recharge because the tank was so big it met all your needs. And then there's a few choices you can make in cooking. And then clothes drying is the really interesting one. Resistance clothes dryers here taking up about 2 kilowatts counted on the panel, even though it's a 4 kilowatt device. The code only counts it at 0.40% coincidence factor for how heavy its load is on the peak. I kind of like, I'm actually down here where I like this one that is a replacement for the washing machine. It's a combined dryer and washing machine in one box. It frees up $10,000 worth of floor space in my house. And the thing only costs as much as a washer and dryer. but anyway, there's also heat pump dryers or condensing dryers or hybrids that use a heat pump and a little resistance. So those are the options, and these arrows are kind of showing which direction to go. And I saw that about 9% of you registered as Jedi electrification people. So then we'd be saying these are not the equipment you're looking for. And you want to look at all these nice power sipping equipment at the top end of each stack. We could make simple replacement lists for people, that just, a list goes something like, replace your 50-gallon gas water heater with this 65-gallon 15 amp heat pump water heater, and it only needs a 15 amp circuit. And then these arrows are just showing a little bit of the circuit shuffle. Like if somebody got one of those combined washer dryers like I use, then that frees up the old dryer circuit that now they can use on their EV. And if they got one of these 2 or 3 ton heat pumps, that are inverter driven on the smaller circuit, and they put it on their old air conditioner circuit, that frees up the old furnace circuit that was 20 amps that now could do a, say, 120 volt heat pump water heater. So you can do a little bit of circuit shuffle and get some needs met that way. But when it comes down to it, if somebody really does want a faster car charger, it often takes some kind of circuit controls if you're using just a 100 amp panel to shoehorn that bigger car charger in there. Say they want to go then just 98,000 miles a year. So anyway, there's ways to get those circuit controls in there. Let's see what else. Oh, here's a picture of the circuit controls. This is one called the DCC9. And so it has these CT clamps that are reading the main power line coming into the house, the service line. And when the service line gets up to 80% of the panel rating, it just sends the signal to this device that says, hey, stop the car charger, just pause the car charger. They're probably cooking on 4 burners right now. Every 15 minutes, it checks back to see, is the load down yet? And then it restarts the car whenever the load is back down. Usually only 15, 30 minutes later. There are smart breakers coming onto the market. Those may be able to do the same thing if you've got the software that's reading the main panel and telling the circuit breaker what to do. There are circuit sharing devices, like you've probably heard of Dryer Buddy and NeoCharge and Split Volt and Simple Switch. Those are 4 brands of these products that plug in, say, to where the dryer has been, and then when the dryer's running, it pauses the car charger. The car sits there and waits until the dryer's done, then the car charging starts back up. There's also kind of the whole house version, but these may be kind of overkill for just plain fitting on the panel, but these can control every single circuit on them, make every circuit pausable, and so you can reprioritize the circuits any way you like. So, typical use of circuit controls is if you've gotten to the end of your electrification and you really want more car chargers, pauser may be the way to go on that. That's probably gets you the most bang for your buck. All right, well, thanks so much, Barry, and I will stop the share. And let you introduce the next speaker.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we are joined today by both Khalil Johnson, I believe decarbonization Jedi with PG&E, as well as his colleague Nick Souza, who's a service planning engineer, and looking forward to hearing your lay out the process and expectations and just what people should be focused on when they believe they've hit the point that they need an electric service upgrade. Were you guys
yes,
ready to
we
go?
are here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Barry, for the warm handoff. Before we get started with the presentation, I wanted to just take a moment and thank the organizers of the webinar. It's been a really great webinar so far. And then more broadly, I'd like to thank the cities of San Francisco and Oakland. I think that both cities are really, really great leaders in the building electrification space. And we recognize that building electrification is an incredibly important tool in California's toolkit, if you will, for achieving its GHG reduction goals. And so it's something that we really are paying attention to and trying to prepare the grid for. We also recognize that there may be times in the building electrification process where things feel cumbersome and things feel confusing. And so we're hoping that with the contents of this presentation, you feel more informed of PG&E's added load process, and you walk away knowing something that you didn't know before you came to this call. So, and if you don't feel that way, we have put our emails on a slide at the end of this presentation, and we are happy to get feedback. We've got some additional resources coming out, and we'd be happy to hear other things that folks would like to hear about, and if we can do things a little bit better. So with that, I will get into quick introductions. Although Barry just introduced me, my name is Khalil Johnson. I am on the decarbonization strategies team at PG&E. And if Nick is off of mute, Nick can also introduce himself. Are we able to do that? Yeah, perfect.
Hi, this is Nick Souza. I'm an industrial power engineer in service planning.
Yes. Awesome. All right. So to get this moving, we'll just quickly cover the agenda items for the next 20 minutes or so. So we're looking to cover a couple items pretty quickly here, but starting with the momentum of building and transportation electrification. And then we'll get into where exactly we're seeing the impacts of building and transportation electrification on the grid. And then we will move into the primary trigger of electric service upgrades. And that'll be a good segue into the added load process and some helpful resources that we think might be good to share. So with that, we can move to our next slide. Thank you, Diana. I think that we skipped one of them. Yes, here we go. All right, so as many of you may know, California is aggressively pursuing electrification in both the building and transportation space. And so these policy goals that I have here on the screen, they're not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. There is so much more than this, but this is meant to give you some indication of the direction that California is looking to go. So on the left-hand side, we have transportation electrification, and we have some goals down below. Maybe you recently heard of the 100% zero emission passenger vehicle sales by 2035 goal. It was just voted on and codified by the California Air Resources Board. And then the next couple goals we have here, the first is focused on 100% zero emission operations and drayage trucks by 2035. And finally, 100% zero emission operations with on-road, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles by 2045. Those two are not codified or in law anywhere, but we're expecting them to be discussed at the California Air Resources Board at some point in the near future. So that's the transportation space. And I know that we're here to talk about building electrification primarily. We're seeing similar momentum in the building space as well. That first box there just covers the CEC's or California Energy Commission's recent study instructed by AB 3232 that assesses the feasibility of reducing emissions in buildings 40% below 1990 levels. And then, of course, we have cities, great cities like the cities of Oakland and San Francisco, and many, many more. I think 25 is an old number at this point, that are considering electrification retrofit targets. And then the last box there, the California Energy Commission, they recommended a goal of 6 million heat pumps by 2030. So again, we're seeing lots of momentum in both of these sectors towards electrification. All right, we can go to the next slide. So where are we seeing the impacts of electrifying these sectors impact the grid? So before going through the text at the very top, we wanted to outline the differences between the primary distribution and secondary distribution systems. So you'll see in the illustration to the right of the screen, there's a picture with wires going to the top of that pole, and then you'll see a bank of transformers. And then you'll see some lines, there's a faint red arrow pointing to them, some lines coming out of that transformer, likely going to serve some customer load. So primary lines or primary distribution is generally much higher, operates at a much higher voltage than secondary. Primary distribution can operate at 4 kV, kilovolts, or 4,000 volts, 12 kV, 21 kV, 34 kV. I think our least common of this list is 34 kV, and I think San Francisco actually is the only area that's served with 34 kV in PG&E service territory. Nick, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that. And then 4 kV is also less common in PG&E service territory. It's on the small side, although there are some areas that are served by 4 kV, like some spots in San Jose. Our most common primary distribution voltage is 12 kV. So the secondary lines or the secondary system, the lines coming out of the bottom of that transformer, the voltage for those lines are at a much lower level, and they're stepped down by the bank of transformers that you see in the photo. And voltages for those lines are generally around 120 to 480 volts. And that 120 volt number should sound familiar to you because it's the same or approximately the same voltage level of a common home receptacle. You might also have 240 volts in your home that might power a electric dryer, or what we hope will be at some point a heat pump water heater, something of that nature. So that's the difference between the primary and secondary distribution system. So to bring this back to electrification and get to the text at the top, Typically, non-residential transportation electrification drives upgrades on primary distribution lines. And so by non-residential, I'm not talking about, for instance, the level 2 charger that you have in your home, talking about public DC fast charging stations, so your Tesla sites or EVgo or Electrify America sites that you might find in a parking lot at Target or outside of your favorite movie theater. Those sites are generally much larger, and those sites can range somewhere between a megawatt sometimes up to 20 megawatts or even larger. And so naturally they require more capacity on the electric grid. Now, residential EV charging and building electrification, those are, we're seeing more impacts on the secondary side. So, you know, for instance, a transformer upgrade, that's where we're seeing impacts there. All right, we can go to the next slide. So what's the primary trigger for electric service upgrades? So when customers upsize their main switchgear, or in other words, their electric panel, that is a primary cause of service upgrades for customers. So as an example, and Tom discussed this ad nauseum, you go from 100 amps on one panel to 200 amps on a panel. That is upgrading, and that's new service that PG&E has to serve. And so that will cause a service upgrade. We can go to the next slide. So that takes us to the added load process. So for the purposes of this discussion, we really tried to simplify things quite a bit by bucketing activities in 4 stages. And the 4 stages are customer planning and application, load assessment and/or service design, contract and payment, and construction and energization. You can go to the next slide. Perfect. So the first stage is customer planning and application. Before I get into the meat of this slide, let me orient you into how it's structured. So you see in the top left corner of the slide, you have a couple rows there, and the purpose of that text is to distinguish between what is PG&E's responsibility and what is the applicant or customer's responsibility. And then we have other things you might see on subsequent slides that discuss timeline or helpful hints, things of that nature. But we thought that this was helpful for this discussion just because we get lots of questions from customers from time to time, like, when is PG&E telling me what size my electric service panel should be? Because I want to install some new appliances. And so those are questions that should be answered as a part of going through this slide, and also highlighting the responsibilities of PG&E and the applicant. So for the meat of this slide, we wanted to distinguish between what is utility owned and what is customer owned electric equipment. And this illustration is informed by electric rules, Rule 15 and 16. Those are electric rules that are governed by the California Public Utilities Commission, and they explicitly distinguish between infrastructure that the customer is responsible for and that utilities are responsible for. So to walk through this illustration, I'm going to start from the left, which is colored in blue, that's supposed to designate utility owned, and make my way over to the right, to red, which is customer owned. So you see those high voltage power distribution lines. We just talked about those a couple of slides ago. Again, that's carrying, you know, very high voltage, 4 kV up to 34 kV. And then you see in this particular example, we have a transformer on a pole, and not everyone receives service like this. Some folks get underground service. We'll go through that in just a second. That transformer steps down the voltage from the higher voltage distribution lines. And then you see the service wire coming out of that transformer. It's the line between the house and the pole. And that takes or carries power from the line, from the utilities infrastructure, through the service entrance conductor, down the weatherhead, down the service mast, into the meter socket. And so that is where, here is where we get to the distinguishing point for utility versus customer owned. The meter is managed, owned, and operated by PG&E. But what's behind it is owned and managed by the customer. And so by behind it, I think for the purposes of the illustration, to the right of the meter, including the service panel. So from the meter behind, that is the customer's responsibility. So that includes the service panel, that includes the, you know, any end uses, any wiring, et cetera. That is the customer's responsibility. And you see there is a square box down on the ground that's a pad mounted transformer. I mentioned earlier that some folks receive underground service. So there's a cable carrying electricity from that pad mounted transformer to the customer's meter base. And that's for customers that get underground service. So again, PG&E is responsible for what's in the blue, and customers are responsible for what's in the red. And that's been determined by our electric rules 15 and 16. So how to bring this to electrification? So when customers are planning and considering electrification, we advise that customers acquire a trained contractor, someone the likes of our friend Tom, to come and assess their home, and based off of your interests and what to electrify, make some recommendation as to wiring and most importantly your panel sizing. All right, next slide. Okay, so still in the customer planning application, but we're actually submitting an application on this particular slide. So the responsibility, it's the applicant's responsibility to submit an added load application on yourprojects.pgne.com. And it's PG&E's responsibility to contact the applicant after having received the application within approximately 3 days and confirm application details. And so the timeline again is around 3 days or so. And in the helpful links row there, I have a link to where you will find some slides to help guide you through the portal. It's a new portal. So the snapshots that I have here, I'm really sorry about how small these come across to you, but what you do is go to your project.pgne.com, and it'll take you to the dashboard. And so you're going to click on, I'm going to make this bigger for myself actually, the start new application. So it's in that red circle. And then that'll take you to the start application portal, where you'll click on new electric or gas services or change an existing electric or gas services. That will lead you to electric and gas in the second row there, and then the new service connection box you should also click on. There are steps subsequent to this, but we just wanted to cover the first couple of things here. The table all the way on the right, that table we thought might be helpful for this discussion. It has information that customers should bring to the application portal. So there are a number of pictures that might be helpful. And there's a list, and the bottom row in that table, it's a list of new electric appliances and associated new loads. So your contractor might be able to help you with that particular item, but of course we need to know what new loads are coming and what new loads we have to serve. There's an additional table all the way at the end we might get to if we have time, but we can keep moving for now. Next slide. All right, so now we're on the load assessment and/or service design. Responsibility here. So it's the applicant's responsibility to pay an engineering advance and support PG&E representatives with additional project details as needed. We'll talk more about the EA or engineering advance in just a second. And then it's PG&E's responsibility to actually perform the load assessment and inform the applicant of findings of that load assessment. The timeline here, and by timeline I mean the work that PG&E is performing, is approximately 30 days. The helpful link here is where you can make a payment for the engineering assessment online. So the engineering assessment is a cost that the customer is responsible for that covers the cost of PG&E actually performing the load assessments. The cost currently, I believe, is about $1,500, but that is subject to change. And the EA may be refunded in like-for-like panel replacement scenarios. So once the customer has paid the engineering advance, PG&E will take into consideration the incremental load customers presented in the application and apply that to relevant infrastructure to see if there's capacity on that infrastructure. So the relevant infrastructure is in this table down below. It's the service wire or cable if you're receiving underground service, conductors, and the transformers. And again, the PG&E representative will determine the existing capacities of this infrastructure based off of what you provided in your application and inform you of findings. We can go to the next one. All right, so the results of that load assessment is obviously fairly important. And so there are instances, and I want to emphasize here, they're very few and far in between, but there are instances where a customer does upgrade their service panel, go from 100 amps to 200 amps as an example, and PG&E does a load assessment and finds that our facilities are adequate or sufficient to serve the incremental load. Again, few examples of that, but in those cases, customers would then go through an accelerated process. So they go through what's called express connections, and PG&E would schedule a disconnect and reconnect for your contractor to come and perform the upgrades necessary, and we'd reconnect your service. Express Connections is a group at PG&E. Is recently founded, and they were founded to handle quick situations such as what I just described. In most cases, however, when you are upgrading your service, customers must, have a service redesign or a service design conducted by PG&E, or in other words, they continue through the added load process. All right, we can go to the next slide. Great. All right, so now we're at contract and payment. So the responsibility here for PG&E is to complete estimating, design, and send the final contract to customers. And the applicant responsibility is, of course, to review the contract, sign that contract, and pay for any necessary customer costs. So the timeline for this process, for PG&E's portion of this process, is approximately 70 days. And a helpful tip here is that detailed added load applications can expedite the process. Oftentimes applications will be missing information, and the PG&E representative will have to go back to the customer, request that information, and there's some back and forth, and that obviously adds time to the overall schedule for the project. So the first step here is site visit. So PG&E will coordinate a site visit with the customer to assess the scope of the project. And then having done that, PG&E will put together a job package and essentially design and estimate any necessary service work needed to accommodate the project. And we will fold it all into a contract. And so customers should sign that contract if they're looking to move forward with the project, and pay for any necessary costs. And we'll talk about costs in just a second. One thing we want to highlight here is that the cost of the engineering assessment that we talked about a couple of slides ago is essentially a credit on the final contract cost. All right, you can go to the next one. Okay, so still on contract and payment. One thing we want to highlight here is that there are some customer costs associated with service work, and those costs and the costs and the projects that customers are responsible for are again outlined in Electric Rule 15 and 16. And as a reminder, those rules are governed and approved by the California Public Utilities Commission and implemented by PG&E, by utilities. So the applicant is responsible to pay all upfront costs associated with service installation, and an allowance of $3,255. That's the most up-to-date allowance we applied to the refundable portion of costs. So some variables that impact costs: panel location and distance from the nearest point of distribution, transformer, especially if there's a single customer on a transformer, generally those customers are responsible for the transformer costs. And if a service is underground, there are trenching costs associated that customers are responsible for. So over on the right, we have types of customer costs. So customer costs include trenching. Again, if you have underground service, substructure and conduit installation, that's for underground, I think, primarily as well, and any protective structures. And there are some photos there just to give you some indication of what we're referring to. All right, you can go to the next one. Okay, so construction and energization. We're getting to the end here. So PG&E responsibility here is to actually complete the required projects. The applicant responsibility is also to complete required projects and required inspections. And the timeline for PG&E's work can range anywhere between 1.5 months, or a month and a half, and 3 months. Again, for just PG&E work. And again, PG&E work can't continue or can't move forward without the customer having completed their share of dependencies. So the first step here is the pre-construction meeting. So PG&E will coordinate a site visit to align on customer tasks and coordinate inspections. Any required inspections of cities, lots of times when customers are doing electrical work, the jurisdiction that they live in will require that a permit be pulled and paid for. And that's another example of a customer cost that's, again, responsibility of the customer. The customer construction step here, so the customer completes any work that they are responsible for. So if it's underground, need the substructure installation and inspections. And I think I have an example here of a green tag inspection, again, a building inspection for any work done by a contractor, for instance, any electrical work that needs to be approved and reviewed by a jurisdiction. And then finally, we have service installation and energization. So PG&E will install new service and coordinate, disconnect, reconnect while the customer completes the panel upgrade. All right, next slide. We thought that this might be important to highlight here. This is the gas disconnection process, especially with some of the goals that were discussed for San Francisco and Oakland. So once your home has been completely converted from dual fuel to all electric, you can safely stop gas service, and that will also stop the interconnection charges. So the way that you do that, there's a snapshot here and takes you through step by step how to do that. So you go back to your projects.pgne.com, click on new electric or gas services, or change to an existing electric or gas service. You're making a change, obviously. And then you click on gas, and then click on existing service connections and permanent removal. That's the process there for you to request removal of gas service. Why would you remove gas service? So we have a couple points here. The first of which is safety. And safety here is by eliminating the gas service, you're eliminating safety concerns during accidental dig-ins or other damage. And then, of course, I mentioned this in the text above, customer cost savings. So customers would be paying about 13 cents a day for a minimum transportation charge for being connected to the gas system. We get lots of questions on this from customers. So wanted to highlight that there. Who pays for moving the gas system? If your gas service is greater than 10 years old, the gas system, the service is removed, not the system, sorry, the service is removed at PG&E's expense. So that's the step there. All right, I think we're near the end here. Yes, all right, so helpful resources. We got 3 here. The first of which is PG&E single family electrification guidebook. So PG&E is developing a single family electrification guidebook, and that should be coming out towards the end of this year, hoping that that's very helpful. That's why feedback is important for stuff like this. We also have a host of classes, on-demand classes, pre-recorded classes that you can find on Pacific Energy Center. So there's a link there for you to find those classes and some classes that are popular. My favorite class that I've taken is avoiding service upgrade class. It's a great class. And then the last thing we have here, number 3, PG&E actually launched an induction loaner program, and the link to find out more about that program is there. You can borrow an induction cooktop and take it home and see how it works and bring it back and get an early experience of something that you might pursue down the road. So we thought that these resources might be helpful. The last thing that I did not include here that I just thought about is we have an electrification email box that you can send emails to. I will go find that and put that in the chat. And that's where you can send questions about electrification, and myself or other experts at PG&E will answer them as quickly as we can. And I think that that's my time. Thank you so much for the time, the platform, and excited for the Q&A portion of the call.
All right. Well, that was fantastic, and we've got a few questions to Q&A. Shana, are you joining me for Q&A?
Yes, sorry about that. I was wondering if Nick was going to, if Nick had anything else to add, or if you folks are done on the PG&E side.
I do not. I'm mainly here for the Q&A portion to help with the technical questions.
Okay, great, thanks. So I really want to thank our expert speakers, Tom, Khalil, and Nick, for the incredible information. We have ample time. We actually finished a little bit ahead of time. So hopefully we can go into some greater depth into any of the information that you all had. I want to just kind of plug a reminder that this conversation is not about new construction. It's not about municipal buildings or commercial or multifamily buildings. We're really just sticking narrowly, specifically to single family homes in this conversation. And we will be talking about multifamily buildings and commercial buildings in an upcoming workshop, which we'll talk more about at the end. So I see a few questions in the chat. I want to just quell everybody's fears that yes, the slides as well as the recording will be made available. And let's see, the first question here that has not been answered yet is about whether cities are working with air districts. And yes, we are. There are ongoing policy conversations amongst all of us with our counterparts at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, otherwise known as the BACMID or the Air District. And there's an ongoing proceeding there looking specifically at how the Air District can regulate emissions inside the home in the same way that air quality is regulated outside of the home. I'll try to dig up some information and put that in the chat in a little bit. Larry Waters, you
maybe, sorry, Shane, just to add to that, in addition, the board of the Air District is comprised of local elected officials. So to a significant extent, the Air District, you know, they're closely associated entities, and your representatives do have a voice on the Air District.
Thanks, Barry. Actually, before I go to Larry, a clarification, when does the 30 days begin? This is for Nick and Khalil. Somebody's saying they've heard endless stories about the process taking a very long time, over a year. So can we get a little bit more clarity on that?
Yes, the process does take quite a long time, but it depends on the scope of work. If you are adding load to an existing panel and the existing panel is adequate to serve and the service is adequate to serve, then there's nothing for PG&E to do. We do a load study and we move on, and the project ends there. If you are adding load to an existing panel that is adequate, but the service is not adequate, PG&E would have to do a design at PG&E's expense, at ratepayer expense, to then install a new service. I mean, and then it goes on from there. The other scenario would be that process would take approximately 16 to 20 weeks. But at that point, it's in order to start that process, we need the application. We need to see what the connected load information is, and then move on from there. And I apologize, I have a tendency to get very technical, so I've tried to keep things high level. And if you would like to dive in and be more technical, I can, but for the sake of answering the questions, I'll keep it high level unless people would like to dive in a little bit further. Another scenario would be, let's say that you have an existing panel that you're keeping same size panel, you're adding load, it's adequate per the city or local jurisdiction. The service is adequate. However, this secondary or the distribution is not adequate. The same thing would happen. PG&E would do a design at PG&E expense and then perform work at PG&E expense. That would all be known as betterment. Scenarios where there would be applicant expense would be if the applicant files an application, says I'm upgrading my existing 100 amp panel to a 200 amp panel. They would provide us with connected load information. If it's an overhead service, it would help to have some pictures of the front of the house, the side of the house, wherever the weatherhead is going to be. Likely a PG&E representative would meet with them to get through the initial portion of the application process. It does take about 30 days. They are still refining that process. We are still working through a few wrinkles. But once you've made it through the initial phase of the application process, then you're handed over to a local representative, whether it be in San Francisco or in Oakland. We have local headquarters in both of those cities. And then a local representative will come out, meet with you, go over the scope of work, discuss the whole process with you. When you're adding load, you're responsible for the cost of the service upgrade, whether it be overhead or underground. But there will be a refundable portion and a non-refundable portion that Khalil had mentioned earlier. The residential allowance will be applied because it is considered new business since you are upgrading. So the allowance is granted, and that'll be applied to the refundable portion of the contract. And the non-refundable portion is there no matter what. On an overhead service, there's only $75 in non-refundable charges. On an underground service, the non-refundables are the $75 plus trenching costs. So however expensive the trenching is, that's part of the non-refundable portion. So obviously the longer a trench, the longer the number, unfortunately, on the line item. So that, with that said, the process, if you are upgrading the service, usually does take between 9 and 12 months. So if you know this is something that you're going to move forward with, and this is a question that I get a lot, and it doesn't matter whether it's a residential project or it's a very large commercial project, I get this a lot. How can I make this go faster? Well, it's best to get your documents together very early, make sure that all the information that's required is there, and get it in as soon as possible. If this is something that you really are passionate about, and you know you're going to move forward with, I would definitely start putting those documents together now. Get that stuff together now and get an application in as soon as possible. And we really want to kick this process off as soon as possible so that we can meet your timelines.
All right, thank you. And there are a couple of additional questions or maybe just frustration about timing. And is there anything else that you can say, Nick, about any steps that PG&E is taking or hoping to take to reduce those timeframes?
I mean, we're always working to reduce those timeframes. I don't have really a great answer that's going to be very well received. I know from my standpoint, as a rep, I'm dealing with these frustrations with you. I don't like these timelines are so long, but there is a lot of work in the queue right now. We're working through that. We're working every day to improve our processes internally. I understand completely that it is frustrating, and it's our jobs as a rep, or our job as a rep to really try to make that as painless as possible. I can't directly do anything to reduce the timelines except for help you get the appropriate documentation together and make sure that it's concise, that all the information that we need is there so that we can move forward with as few hiccups as possible. And I know that's definitely not what everybody wants to hear, but I will say that the sooner that you kick it off on your side, on the application side, the sooner that we can get the ball rolling on PG&E side. With residential switchgear, it's usually stuff that's readily available. I know there have been some supply chain issues with larger switchgears. That's where we run into much larger lead times, custom order switchgear. But this residential switchgear, we're in a tight spot because you can get your switchgear relatively quickly. And a lot of times, electricians and homeowners alike, they don't typically think to file an application until they've already done most of the work. So the message that I like to send to folks is submit the application before you've even started work. Submit the application as you're working with a couple of electricians and you're trying to solidify an electrician. You can submit your application at the same time. You don't necessarily need an electrician to submit an application for service, although it is recommended, because a lot of folks are not familiar with electricity, are not familiar with, voltage and phase and connected load and what is all of this stuff. So if you're one of those folks, then absolutely, you want to get started with an electrician as soon as possible and work with them to get your application submitted as soon as possible. But for those of you that have the knowledge, the technical knowledge, and you're confident in submitting your application and getting all of the information put together and working with a PG&E rep, absolutely, dive in right away. That's the best way to make the process quicker.
Thank you so much, Nick. Chock full of information, and I think Tom has something to add.
Yeah, thanks so much. So I'm highly sympathetic to the dilemma faced by electric utilities, having been employed by one for 30 years. You know, as we're going to try to electrify, it is a race for the pole tops. And so all this stuff I was sharing about panel optimization or efficient electrification or watt dieting, whatever you want to call it, all of it reduces stress on the service line system and on the transformers that are serving it, and so ultimately on the feeders as well. So the thing we can all do to help get through this, it especially applies to us customers, but to the program designers and the utilities and the city administrators, et cetera, we probably all need to pivot towards this, you know, programs that really favor the solutions, not the big sloppy devices that people have been lured into. And so favoring controls, having incentives for controls instead of panel upsizing would make a lot of sense. And having incentives for the lower power water heaters instead of the high power ones. So really focusing incentives where you can, but the codes can't really go that way because of the Commerce Clause and federal preemption, but incentive programs are not held to the Commerce Clause and these kind of things. So all of you city programs out there who may want to offer incentives, figure out what's going on with the federal IRA. It creates these tailwinds, but then you can help steer them. You've still got a rudder. Even though we've got tailwinds, we still need to steer, and let's steer off the collision at the pole top by steering into kind of efficient panel design.
Dana, if I may, I just wanted to voice that PG&E is incredibly supportive of the approaches that Tom laid out, specifically avoiding service upgrades. That avoiding service upgrades allows us to increase utilization of existing equipment and without having to make additional capital investments. And so what that means for rates, as an example, is we're able to increase our kilowatt hour sales. And what that does is allow us to spread more fixed costs over those sales and put downward pressure on rates. And so if we can electrify without having to upgrade service, without having to continue to make capital investments, that is good for all customers.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to build a little on what Khalil mentioned. That is right. That's the way the rate making formula goes, and it works on the municipals as well as on PG&E and the investor-owned utilities. But you know, I focused on avoiding panel upsizing. Even if you already have a big panel, say you've got a 200 amp panel, if you do this efficient electrification, you can save yourself some money in terms of having a better heat pump that uses less electricity, and also then it lets more people electrify. It gets it. You know, you pick the efficient equipment, even though you already have a big panel. Pick the equipment that leaves space for others to electrify. That's how we'll save the climate, is making orderly space. And one of the slogans to try to integrate is electrify simply so others may simply electrify.
I always love your poetry, Tom. And so for that, I'm going to hand the next question to you. This question from Mike Bishop. He says, I've heard that the next adopted National Electric Code will give more flexibility around using software to dynamically manage loads as an alternative to service upsizing. Can you or others share more information about that?
So I don't know too much about the next NEC code cycle. See, I think California's been on the 2016 NEC, and they're popping up a notch. I do notice parts of the existing code we're using recognize dynamic load management in a way. They're recognizing that control devices allow you to not load the thing into the panel calculations. And I use often in retrofit the part of the code 220.83b. That is the part of the NEC code that you would use when you're trying to add more devices, including heat pumps, to an existing service. And so that's where we do our panel calculations. But you know, the thing I showed with those bar graphs that showed a little bit of blue loading and then all that green space above, when Josie and I do the calculations on our homes, the 220.83b method shows our panels are fully loaded. When we look at the data for how much we're using, we're not fully loaded. Those those panel calculations are pretty conservative in the 83B method, and customers can use the 220.87 method that takes a look at their existing usage. And that's the way to kind of ease in each new project. And one other quick thing while I'm got the mic, it's the federal IRA has essentially a $14,000 climate savings account for every household that we're all qualified for starting January 1st. And then we can do the spending on electrification projects out of that account, and then we get reimbursed. The state will set up that program to administer that federal money to us. In there, a number of really worthwhile energy saving projects like better heat pumps and insulation compete with the allocation for panel upsizing. And so even though there's a $4,000 ability to harvest for panel upsizing, I say, no, use more of your money in that account to do the better heat pump, the better controls, the circuitry you need, do it on that other spending, not on the panel, even though they earmarked it, but the money's fungible within the $14,000 account. So do your plan and use the money for insulation, higher COP equipment, and the circuits that you need. Oh, and to all us program administrators, program designers from the different agencies, start looking at the IRA for that way of how will we be the rudder that helps steer the customers into the right decisions.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, switching gears a little bit, no pun intended. What type of scenarios might require PG&E to upgrade a transformer in most Oakland neighborhoods? If a number of homes on a street electrified, both home and cars, at what point would that require a transformer upgrade? And I know that this is that can range, perhaps infinitely. So I don't know if anybody wants to take a stab at that or just say, well, it depends on how smart we all get with this.
Well, it depends heavily on the equipment, the existing distribution equipment. There's no simple answer for that. One house on a street can trigger existing distribution facility upgrades. Some of the circuits are very tightly loaded just because they've been around for so long, and there's so much. There are so many customers on that circuit. So it could be as little as one house. It could be as many as a dozen houses on a street finally trigger it. It just depends on the loading on all of the existing distribution.
And to follow up on that, Nick, when that say the transformer gets upgraded on a given block, so it's serving multiple customers and not a single customer. I know this was covered in the presentation, but just kind of reiterating the point, is there a portion of that upgrade of the transformer in the single family context that's borne by, say, the last person whose electric vehicle charger triggers the transformer upgrade?
No, so distribution, anything that's considered a distribution facility is something that is upgraded as betterment at ratepayer expense, PG&E expense. So the only time that a customer would be responsible for a transformer upgrade would be if they were in a rural part of San Francisco or Oakland, which we know is probably not going to happen, where they're the only customer on that transformer. That is a service facility. So service facilities are any facilities that serve a single customer. Distribution facilities are any facilities that serve more than one customer. And any upgrades to facilities that serve more than one customer would be performed as betterment.
Thanks, Nick. That's very helpful clarification. I think there's a lot of confusion, misinformation out there about that. So I really appreciate that one. I'll answer a quick question that was for me. What type of policies are the city of Oakland exploring to trigger an electrification upgrade? Will this fall solely on reach codes and permit triggers, or will the city try and attach this to point of sale? And what I can say now is that we don't know. We haven't started the process of looking at all of our different options. There is, there are point of sale triggers, there could be equipment burnout replacement triggers, there could be permit triggers. There are questions of, what is the threshold? Is it a renovation that's a certain percentage of the square footage, or is it just a baseline square footage? Is it a particular portion of the home or building? There are so many different parameters that we are looking through. I will say that the BayREN, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, has done some preliminary look into recommendations for different options that cities can pursue. And so one of our first steps will be looking through what are the options that that others out there have said are some best practices to maximize benefits, especially to most vulnerable frontline communities, and minimize harms, really minimize undue cost burdens and such. So point of story, Karen, is that we will be having some public engagement opportunities around this, and you'll definitely be hearing about it. So please do stay tuned. I am going to go to a question that is another broad and open-ended question. Do we have any anecdotes about folks who are electrifying and deciding to go completely off the grid? And let's maybe just have a quick answer on this, and this can be from any of the panelists.
I'm personally aware of one building in San Francisco, and that is adjacent to San Francisco Public Utilities Commission facilities, but it's the Eco Center at Heron's Head Park. And it serves as an environmental education center.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, from my perspective, microgrids are kind of all the rage for larger facilities, particularly when those facilities are, looking to become resilience hubs or other, community serving resilience facilities or critical facilities for critical loads. But the grid is a giant battery backup and really does help to kind of efficiently allocate electrons across the whole community. So, there may be personal reasons for going off grid, but I don't know of, many, I don't know of any specific cases other than the one that Barry mentioned.
Yeah, to me, I look at it and I think of the grid as the thing that allows for diversity, and essentially it's the village. And so it kind of makes sense for me to stay connected to the grid so that I can be putting out excess power I have from my solar system and taking in what I don't have, and relying on the different resources. I personally don't want to go off the grid. I want to become a good gridizen. I want to be there to do the right things to help it through its little troubles. And, that's satisfying to me, but other people want to thumb their nose at the village. That could be satisfying to them.
All right, so we'll go on to the next. How much does it cost the homeowner to remove the gas line in cases where PG&E is not going to pay for it? Do we have any average costs there, Nick or Khalil?
Yes. So if your gas service is less than 10 years old, which in many cases in the city of San Francisco and the city of Oakland, that is not the case. I will say that most of these gas services are, now keep in mind, it's the date that your service was originally installed, not the date that PG&E came through and did a PG&E expense service upgrade. Like we've done copper pipeline replacements, we've done low pressure upgrades, we've done all kinds of infrastructure upgrades that were all PG&E driven. That is not the date that drives whether it's at applicant expense or PG&E expense. So please keep that in mind. Don't think to yourself, oh man, PG&E was just in my driveway 3 years ago. This is going to cost me a fortune to get removed. No, that's not what drives it. It's the date of the initial installation. So if the service was originally installed 10 years and 1 day ago, PG&E, you've satisfied the mainline extension agreement, and that service would be removed at PG&E expense. Now, in the case that your service is less than 10 years old, it will be, it really depends, and you have the option to do the trenching yourself. But if it was to be done 100% by PG&E, PG&E digs the bell hole, PG&E cuts the service off, it's likely going to range between $5,000 and $10,000, and it's going to be based on whether, you know, all the permits and traffic control that are around it. You may have a friend that does trenching and may be able to help you out with that. That's great. We just need to make sure that they are operator qualified. They have the operator qualification certification so that they can actually perform trenching around PG&E pressurized facilities. So that said, I would say that the biggest thing is before you panic about how much it costs to remove the service, if when the time comes, try to remember when that service was installed. And if it was 10 years ago or greater, then, you know, there's no reason for panic.
Thank you so much,
If
Nick.
you are unsure of when your service was installed, you can call 1-800-PGE 5000.
Important number to note. All right, another question for Nick and Khalil. This is from Kellen. What is the average cost to a homeowner when a panel upgrade is needed? And this is, you know, specifically looking at the cost of upgrading the panel itself, not all the other, you know, work associated with the electrification upgrade. And yes, just, you know, stressing again, whenever possible, avoid the panel upgrade. But yeah, Kellen heard $1,500 for the engineering assessment. What other PG&E related costs are there?
I just want to be clear, the actual service, the switch gear, the gear that sits on the side of your house that holds the meter and has the main switch in it, the cost of that is between you and an electrician. The cost of the either service cable, if it is an underground service, or service wire, if it's an overhead service, will depend greatly. It's going to depend. So an underground service installation is more expensive because you have trenching involved. An overhead service installation, if the pole is on your side of the street, in most cases, is only going to cost you $75 if it's a service upgrade. Okay, and that's just that $75 is the per meter charge, and that's basically it's so that we can reestablish a meter set and it's for record keeping purposes, and it's also so that we can apply the allowance to your contract. We have to charge the meter charge to be able to apply the allowance. We can't apply the allowance if we don't charge the meter charge. So it's $75 and you get $3,255. That said, and I know I'm not really answering the question, I'm only muddying it up a bit. It's the cost of the service installation will range. If it's an underground, let's talk about underground, because these are the most expensive installations. It will range. If you have a very short driveway, or if you are building, which in San Francisco and in some parts of Oakland, your building is all the way up to property line, and the secondary box is right out in front of your house, it could be a very short trench. We could be talking about service installation that'll cost less than $5,000. Those are somewhat rare instances. They're not extremely rare instances, but they are somewhat rare instances. Typically, for service only underground service installations, they will vary in cost between $5,000 and $10,000, not including trenching. Trenching, and here's another place where you can save time, is if you hire your own qualified trenching agent. While PG&E does have the ability to perform the trenching, PG&E doesn't always have the resources to perform the trenching in the schedule that you would prefer. So something else to keep in mind.
So Shana, getting a lot of questions about that raise a kind of different area topic. So, you know, it seems to boil down to two parts. Does PG&E have data about the size of electric panels and the size of customer gas connections? And then internally, does PG&E use that for tracking?
So PG&E keeps records of the services, the size of the services that are installed, both on the gas and electric side. We do not keep records of customer-owned facilities. Like, say, for instance, the customer has 100 amp mains, which we don't keep a record of that. We don't keep a record of the size of the main switch at each house. We do, however, have a record of the size of the service conductor that is installed to that house. We also have a record of the size of the gas service that is installed to that house, as well as the size of the gas meter. Electric meters are universal. For the sake of this conversation, we'll just say that they're universal, whereas gas meters are not. They vary in size based on connected load. So we keep a record of, on the gas side, we keep a record of not only the gas service size, but also the meter size.
And, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nick, I was wondering if, since PG&E has that, the record of the service wire connection size, are they able to supply the record of that to, say, the city program trying to look at helping people make electrification plans, just to know how big those service wires are?
And that would be so that you could calculate if there's the ability to, like, to determine if the service is adequate to serve. Is that what you're looking for?
Right. Well, just trying to, I'm so bad at eyeballing it. When I walk up to it, I can definitely tell what the meter disconnect is and things like that. But I look at the wires and go, oh, I don't know. Are those able to do 100 amps, 125, 175? I don't know. But you're
So
saying.
I will say this for PG&E performs demand calculations different from NEC. So PG&E does not adhere to NEC demand calculations. So it's always best to provide your connected load and then let PG&E perform the proprietary demand calculations to determine if that service is adequate or not. So yes, we could work with you to provide the service size, but at the same time, it's an associate distribution engineer's responsibility to perform those demand calculations, the PG&E demand calculations, to determine if that service is adequate to serve. Because in most cases, like, say, for instance, a 1-aught service, the NEC will say it's only capable of serving up to a certain amount, where the PG&E demand calculations will go further.
All right. Thanks, Nick.
You're welcome.
Could on the similarly on the gas side, so your presentation helpfully points out that there's the interconnection fee for, I'm sorry, a term incorrect, but 13 cents a day for being connected to the gas system per customer. And one answer is exactly how you've shared it, right? That if you could have the device removed if it's 10 years old or older. But on the other hand, if a group of customers in a given area had essentially zero consumption, would it make sense to disconnect all of them at the same time? And is that a topic that's being explored?
It's I mean, anything is possible, but it's, if let's say you have a house with, a street with 50 houses on it, and 10 people decide that they're going to completely eliminate their gas services at the same time, we would still have to dig 10 individual bell holes. We couldn't just cut the main off, because you have other services that are being fed from that main. So we would still have to dig 10 individual bell holes to cut off those services. So in essence, for the most part, most gas services are fed directly off of the main. Now, in some newer developments, you'll have where you have a mother service and then a branch. And that's typically in most subdivisions. And those of us that live a little bit further out, you'll see that in subdivisions where there's a mother service and then there's a branch service off of it. Let's say that both of those houses decided at the same time that they wanted to cut their gas service off and go all electric. Well, in that case, PG&E would only dig one bell hole because the one house is served off of the mother service, one house is served off of the branch service. But in most cases in San Francisco or Oakland, the houses are served directly off the main. You don't come across too very many branch type services. So again, just to reiterate, if you had a street with 50 houses on it and 10 people came and said, we want to cut our services off, we've got 100% electric. Okay, that's great. We could probably coordinate scheduling so that those cutoffs could all take place in very close proximity to one another, so that it's as little disruption on that street as possible, but it's still 10 separate bell holes.
Thank you. That's super helpful. I'd like to come back to that, but we're gonna make sure that we get the audience questions. So we have a potentially a challenging panel upgrade example to just raise the stakes here. So question posed by Richard Young, and Richard looks like he's still connected. So if Jeffrey, if you don't mind promoting Richard in case we have a follow-up question, we could just let him share his perspective directly. But just for the audience, he's appreciates Tom's great discussion of the importance of using diversity to our advantage and making use of existing service, but he's personally had trouble with that, and the overall project cost is is greater than becoming quite substantial, and I'm having trouble paraphrasing, so Jeffrey, did you have a chance to promote Richard to be specific about his challenge?
Hello there.
Hi.
Great, you can hear me. Excellent. So thank you so much, and excellent conversation. And yes, in my own personal situation, what happened was 2019, I wanted to add a car charger to my house in anticipation of getting electric vehicle. So I said, great, I already had a contractor working on something. I had a permit open for a bathroom remodel. And I said, okay, let's go ahead and up the panel because my panel's 100 amps. And he said, yeah, about $3,500, I'll up it. So as we started looking at my current panel, we realized it was too close to my gas meter. And I guess in previous years, PG&E had not enforced that, but they've started to enforce it. That's great. I'm a safety guy, so I'm for safety. But that meant then that the panel had to be moved. And so we said, okay, how do we do that? There's no space on the exterior. So we created a sub panel inside. And now I live in a 103-year-old house with knob and tube wiring. So when you move your panel, then that triggers the code. You have to put in arc breakers. Throughout the house, arc breakers don't work with knob and tube wiring. So what started as about a $3,500 issue is now looking like, $35,000. Now that includes, removing the knob and tube out of my house and adding some outlets. So there's an added benefit there. I that's a good thing. But my overall question is that 3 years later, and into that time period, take into account that there's a pandemic, so that slowed everything down. But what I'm seeing, I'm an engineer, electrical engineer, and I'm trying to work all this stuff out. My contractor's having a hard time getting the permit. We bumped into these various issues with codes and et cetera. And so my question is, to all of you, how are we going to make this simple for the people who are not electrical engineers and don't know you guys? And, we have somewhat of a challenge here. Now, one thing I'm going to say is, in kind of answering my own question, I really like what Tom is saying. And Khalil, perhaps I stay with my 100 amp panel. I don't have to irritate PG&E at all. I follow, Tom's advice, and we try to keep all of my load within that 100 amps. But Shauna, that means then that the city inspector is going to have to give me some variance on the NEC, because we still have that NEC issue where they're going to come count up loads and potentially make me want to upsize the panel. So So I'll pitch it out maybe as a potential solution here, because I love solutions. Sean and I work with you and see what we can do with the city folks. Khalil, I keep you in the loop. We kind of make this a case study. And Tom, you and I put our heads together to try and size things out. And perhaps if we keep my crazy 103-year-old house on 100 amps, we get a good case study that we can use going forward. But having said all that, you, the policy folks, I'll pitch that question out. How are you thinking about this, simplifying these things and making it work for everybody?
So Tom, you're going to take this, but before
Yeah.
you do, just want to, since neither Shane or I are on the building inspection side, then we're just going to stipulate for this one question, the assumption that Richard has to meet the NEC. So please take it away.
All right, thanks. So Richard, you set up a great case there. It's really just a high stakes case. So you've got a classic situation of gas meter, near electric meter, whole thing old, you've got knob and tube. And so, people, I think, accidentally get into trying to upgrade everything, which is an expensive adventure. What I recommend is take a look at the cheaper path. And I know it's a little late in the process for you, but it basically involves leaving all the circuits that are knob and tube alone. They're still working. They're still compliant. They're not, there's not a law that says you need to replace those. So leave them alone. They're out of the electrification. The nice thing is all these LED lights we've got now and very efficient other appliances have reduced the loads on your knob and tube wiring. So that's nice because they're not heating up anymore. Okay, then the electrification is new circuits for the things like the car charger. And so it's really right sizing the car charger and using controls if you have to pause the car charger if the whole thing got to high loading. And so I put in one of the other answers, there's roughly a $400 to $700 pauser you can buy, different brands of these pausers that measure the current going into the house and just pause the car charger when the whole thing gets to 80% loading on the 100 amp panel. And that only takes, say, a half hour till that load is passed once or twice a year, I think. And so that's going to be easy. But the beauty of this approach is you leave the existing panel where it is and you finesse everything behind it. And so you never have to deal with the closeness of gas and electric. Eventually you degas your house, you remove that gas thing, and then you can move your panel if you feel like it anywhere you want. And if you feel like having 3-pronged sockets and grounding and arc fault protection and things like that, you can do that. That's all separate than electrifying and saving the climate. That's just a separate housing upgrade you can do. So I really recommend people think flexibly about how to disconnect these projects and achieve electrification simply, and policymakers, I really recommend doing that, not sequencing everything where you can't start electrifying until you solve the world's problems before electrifying. Meanwhile, we go over the climate cliff and it's hard to solve them.
So sorry to abbreviate you, Richard, and I'll be happy to talk with you also offline. But just to reiterate, I think a key point there. So your proposal, Tom, is to comply with the NEC, and then you have some workarounds that fit within it.
Right. So complying with the NEC in either the 22083B method, and you can use controllers to pause the car charger for that and efficient equipment, or use 220.87. And that one looks at your past 12 years load, finds the highest load of any hour or 15-minute period in there, adds a 20% safety buffer, and says you get the rest of the remaining space at 100% nameplate rating for equipment where you can add things in. And that's an easy place to do 1 or 2 projects per year. Is that method works out well for doing 1 or 2. If you try to load 4 projects into that remaining space, all at 100% nameplate rating, they exceed the space sometimes. But so anyway.
And you made a calculator to help people navigate those rules.
Oh yeah, so we've made calculators for that, and you see us do the calculations in that PG&E class, and then Josie's been making an app that she's able to load up onto the web now that'll help people do these things. So yeah, there's definitely ways to do it. It's just that the trades haven't had to face the challenge before, and they haven't had to think of all the other trades facing it at the same time as we tried to get everything done in these houses. So So we're just in a new ballpark of threading the needle a better way and focusing on the end game. We're trying to get everything to fit. Play electric Tetris.
Can I throw out one more, Gina? So it's a quasi follow-up. It's not rooted in the specific case study we were just chatting about, but in, I believe, Khalil's presentation, he shared that the implicit process flow is that for disconnecting gas you'd only be able to disconnect the gas after you had fully completed the electrification process. And so I was hoping you could comment on whether I understood that correctly, because that could have cost implications for the customer to actually make modifications to the electric system or the gas system serving that home to comply with code that might just be unnecessary if they did the whole thing in one project. So did I understand that correctly? And could you elaborate on why they would need to be sequenced?
So, and I'll weigh in while people are thinking. When I finished my electrification, PG&E never came out to look at it. I did a whole lot of DIY stuff and put in portable heat pumps and window heat pumps and things like that. I called PG&E and they were able to just end my gas account. So I no longer have a gas account on my bill. I still get the electric bill. And so I don't know that there's a sequencing required by PG&E in terms of what you do first before you can stop gas service.
Okay. Khalil, you want to?
I'll
Thanks, Nick.
So sorry. And I didn't catch the whole question. I apologize.
Oh, sorry. It's essentially, did I understand correctly that in the slide about the removing gas service, that it's necessary to complete the process of electrification prior to disconnecting the gas service? And the reason that I'm asking that particular question is sometimes some of the electrical equipment, the best location for it might be in proximity to what might be now out of compliance with the code for the gas service. So moving one or the other devices adds another step and an expense that could add that, if I understood correctly. So hope that clarified, Nick.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you could cut the gas service off ahead of completely electrifying your house. You'd just be taking cold showers. That's all. I mean, not to make too light of it, but okay. No, there's no requirement that says you could decide now that you don't want gas service anymore and that's it. That would be the end of it. So it's one of those things where, yeah, it absolutely does beg the question, well, maybe I should cut my gas service off so I don't have to move my electric panel. That is something that you need that should be addressed on a case-by-case basis. And I'm pulling up Green Book section 2, and I'm not going to be able to share it because I can only use Zoom through my iPad, unfortunately, and I'm pulling up the standard on my computer, but I bring up Green Book section 2 because there was a recent update to it, which if you are, and I don't want to chew up too much time here, so I'm trying to get to it as quick as possible. I'm sorry. Here we go. So if you are making an existing panel, if you're upgrading an existing electric service, the dimension is actually measured 3 feet radially from the regulator vent. So I want to bring attention to this right now. And if you're able to write this into the comments or something, you'll look at Green Book section 2, page 2-38, figure 2-22. Okay. And there's a great figure here on the dark gray area is a no-no zone. And then you get into shaded areas and more details around no existing electric meter panels, no new electric meter panels, but it'll make more sense to you once you've had an opportunity to review it. So I would say that if you are upgrading an existing electric panel, it's on the side of the house and it's in very close proximity to your gas meter, please review this section of the Green Book, this figure within section 2, because it could be incredibly helpful for you.
Did you have one queued up, Sheena? Sorry.
No, we are a minute away from 7 o'clock, and I want everybody to get back to their dinner and their kids and their spouses and their dogs and fish and whatever. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. This has been an incredible session, wonderful 2 hours. Please remember that we have another session coming up on Wednesday, the 28th. That is in 3 weeks as I look at my calendar, focusing on multifamily buildings and commercial buildings. Most of the same folks in front of you, possibly a couple of additions or changes. And we will be posting the recording along with the Q&A, and we'll do our best to also include in that any questions that we were not able to get to. And we will be including links to everything that was mentioned, including the code sections, the calculator that Tom created, the Pacific Energy Center and BayREN courses, and all of that other wonderful stuff. Barry or others, any other last minute words?
No, I just really appreciate the time that Tom and Khalil and Nick have shared with us tonight. Of course, Gina and you and Jeffrey and Diana, my colleague, and appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, you all. I think we can all do it.